Hey everybody, Superfiend here, and welcome to another time-lapse video from my park Whacky World. Today we'll be looking at a flat ride skin I built for the Hellion Ring, and I'm excited to share this with you because I'm happy with the result, but it's also an excellent example of how having a narrative can help drive your imagination and creativity when building, and that's what I want to talk about today. One of the things I did when designing Whacky World is I partitioned the park into major areas with paths, and then I loosely decided what the theme for each area would be. This area with the Hellion Ring is supposed to be a tropical region inhabited by pirates, but there's also elements of an ancient and lost civilization, and that's my narrative. It was very simple. When I started this it was just pirates, tropical, and lost civilization. That's it. And when I started working on the ride skin here that you're seeing, I wanted to start with the idea of the lost civilization. And I thought an easy way to do that would be to create a simple plaza out of stone architecture, and that's what you're seeing. The sandstone pieces are very appropriate for this theme, so they form the basis of the plaza, and I've created a tiered design because it helps to distinguish the plaza from the surrounding terrain and scenery. I think this is a very common theme with plazas, and that they're often not the same elevation as the ground around them, so I've repeated it here, and it just so happens that it helps to make it look more interesting as well. After building the plaza, I wanted to make the base a little larger with rounded corners to help give a sense of the scale that the lost civilization had. They didn't build little rinky-dink creations. They had the manpower, the prosperity, and the skill to create larger structures, and that helps drive the sense of wonder and awe when you view these things in the park. To help complete the theme of the plaza, I added some pillars and fountains. Pillars are a very common theme among stone architecture civilizations, so of course they're appropriate here, and I've built these out of the fairy tale end caps. The ability to control water is a hallmark of great engineering, so I've included the fountains to show how capable these ancient builders were. Feeling that the plaza outside the building was complete, I then moved to the interior and started decorating around the actual Hellion Ring. I wanted to keep the theming of the plaza and stone architecture consistent, so I repeated the tiered design, but I added a small variation, and the easiest way to describe it is that outside the plaza is lifted off the ground, but inside the plaza floor or the ground floor it appears sunken in. And you could also describe it as saying the outside plaza is outset from the surrounding ground levels, and on the inside it is inset. To achieve this, I changed the grid to 2 meters and just offset the pieces, and you could achieve a similar design with more granularity if you wanted by using multiple separate buildings and varying the steps in increments smaller than 2 meters. Because of the 2-meter grid, some of the pieces poke out of the walls, and you'll see I make a crude attempt to mesh them into the building. And I also toy with rounding out the corners because I don't like the sharpness of the intersecting wall pieces. I think one of the major obstacles in becoming a proficient builder in Planet Coaster is learning how to cover up and hide the harsh corners, edges, transitions, or graphical glitches after you create your basic building shapes with the built-in grid pieces. But the more you do it, the better you get. We're now moving on to something a little more interesting, and that this is where my simple narrative started to expand and drive the rest of the design for this ride skin. If you recall, the narrative was lost civilization, pirates, and tropical, and I already had a good foundation in the scenery piece for the lost civilization aspect, so I wanted to add the pirate element. But pirate what? What exactly did the pirates do here? And I thought about it, and eventually I decided the pirates discovered this plaza. Maybe it was lost away in the dense jungle, and then they built some sort of torture house or a penitentiary on top of it. So you can see how the design of the building is now changing as the narrative expands. The first change is that I'm using limestone instead of sandstone. This helps to break up the monotony of the building, and it provides a clear sense of separation between the Lost Civilization and pirate themes. The idea that this is a gel house is driving the interior design to that of having gels, holding pens, stockades, and those hanging scenery pieces with the skeletons in it. Since the narrative has expanded to say that this is a pirate prison, it starts to give us more ideas for how we can decorate this scenery. For example, a pirate culture would have been one that made a public display about punishment for crimes, so now we can go back outside to the plaza and add more scenery to tell that story. I've added the stockades since they're low-hanging fruit in that endeavor, and then I did my best to build a Hangman's platform. The platform was a little tricky because there isn't an actual new scenery piece, and the closest rope piece we have has metal in it, but I did my best to hide it. The rest of the platform is built out of the wood framework grid piece, beams, and balcony pieces, and I positioned them to give the idea that the floor kind of drops away, or at least there's a hole in the floor. The design is kind of simple because, practically speaking, I think it would have been, but also because the hanging rope, the raised platform, and the missing floor is enough for our minds as viewers to complete the illusion. And that's another important thing to bear in mind when building things. Often while you're building it, you feel it needs to be perfect, but that's not necessary because people viewing your creations don't know where you as the creator feel it's imperfect or incomplete. And as long as your scenery tells the right story, the viewer will mentally fill in gaps and imperfections while viewing it at a large scale. So right here I've slowed the footage down a little bit so we can appreciate what this scenery looks like after 2 episodes of building with our narrative. We can see inside how the idea that it's a prison with cells is really taking hold, and the different wall textures help to separate the larger themes of Lost Civilization versus Pirate Town. We've now jumped ahead about 20 episodes in the timeline of my Whacky World Let's Play because I did run out of ideas for this scenery. I've had creator's block a few times while designing Whacky World, and each time I've found it helpful to set aside whatever it is I'm struggling with and then work on something else for a little bit. Simultaneously, I try to be careful not to start so much at once that it becomes overwhelming and difficult to go back and finish things. Basically, if I get stuck, I work on something else to allow new ideas to develop, and then I try to use those new ideas to dislodge that creator's block that I had. One of the things I decided when I returned to this ride was that I didn't like the sandstone walls. The sandstone was used by the Lost Civilization, and if I kept it for the walls, then it implies I would have to build larger surrounding stone architecture. I already did that in a few other areas of this part of Whacky World, and I also found all of the sandstone to be monotonous and boring, so I replaced the walls with limestone. This helps drive the narrative that the ancient people built the plaza and the pirates built everything on top of it. This also ends up being more practical because Planet Coaster has more and better pirate scenery pieces than it does ancient stone civilization pieces. Now I'm trying to tackle the ride exit and departure from the building. To help break up the monotony of the limestone texture, I decided woodwork would be more pleasing. I used some of the fairy tale columns to cover the hard transition between the limestone and wood textures, and I've also used those same columns around the edges of the tiered floor. So continuing them up the wall helps to fuse the themes and the textures together and make everything look like a cohesive unit. It's also not out of place with our narrative because we can imagine the pirates used some of the existing stonework from the Lost Civilization when they constructed their own buildings. Then, to strengthen the idea that this is a prison, I built a heavy wood door that could be closed to keep people from escaping or others from getting in, and I eventually repeat this concept for the ride entrance too. Here's another good example of how our expanded narrative is helping to push the building design forward. We can imagine that, since this is a prison, there would be an upper floor or deck with either cells or devices for punishment. And to that end, I've started building a wood walkway around the inner walls of the building. Besides helping to tell the story of our narrative, this walkway is another way to break up the monotony of the large limestone walls. One of the things you can do when building is to break up large walls or other surfaces into smaller subsections with beams and supports. And this almost always helps to make your scenery look more realistic, because that's basically how most buildings and architecture appear in real life. I also chose the building materials very carefully. I picked wood because I felt the walls didn't appear thick enough to support a very heavy walkway made out of stone or bricks. And I picked this particular wood because of the little gaps between the boards. I just felt that they matched the theme of a pirate prison more than some of the other wood textures. Then I added a basic railing, again picking a style and material I felt most appropriate. And to give the illusion of practicality, I built in some angled supports that lead into the wall. Once I was happy with my design, I duplicated it around the building and found that it was too wide where it passed over the prison cells, so I made the walkway more narrow along those two walls where that was the case. After adding the inner walkway, I started to feel the building was too closed inside, and I wanted to open it up a little bit and add another unique element to it as well. To that end, I removed some of the walls on the second floor, and I extended the walkway out to the outside of the building. This was the perfect place to add some of the hanging skeletons and strengthen the overall theme and narrative of the building. It also serves as a focal point to that part of the building, or that side of the building, and will draw the viewer's eyes in that direction. And that should allow the remainder of the outside of the building to not need as much decorations, but still appear complete. After trimming out some more footage, we've arrived to the decoration of the roof. You can see I've added the castle ramparts, and while there is one large tower on one corner of the building, I've softened the other three corners with smaller stone columns. For signs of life and character, I've added some barrels that could be storing various supplies, and also hay, which, given the narrative of the building, might be used to clean up blood and other bodily fluids. I do experiment with the idea of adding a loading crane that would be used to lift supplies up the side of the building to the roof, but in the end I decided not to implement it. I also add some ladders near one of the towers to give the impression that someone might climb the ladder to get into the tower, since the tower itself is too small to add a trap door. Also, because of the narrative-driven design, I add the wood platform and the bell tower, and I'd like to imagine that this is where the warden or the prison master would stand and ring the bell to gather the inhabitants of the pirate town, and before announcing and issuing a punishment. Lastly, in this segment, I add another distinguishing element to the building, and it's a smaller platform to place some more stockades on. Adding this here does a few things. It repeats the theme of the larger platform on the opposite side of the building, and it also helps to break up the roof ramparts that are pretty much uniform around the top trim of the building. So it helps to break those up and add something unique. I think it's worth noting that the primary inspiration for this element came from the larger opening on the back of the building, and had it not been for that, I may have not had the inspiration for this element, and that element, the platform on the back of the building, spawned from the surrounding narrative. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if I had stopped my narrative at "this will be a pirate building," I may not have spawned these other ideas. But because I extended the narrative to say this is a pirate prison built on top of an ancient plaza, all these new and fresh ideas were formed. And you'll also notice there's quite a few pirate scenery pieces that I did not use, like the fruit market, because they just don't belong in a prison. Most of the time I wait until my buildings are mostly complete before I start adding any sort of lighting, and that's where we are now. I think it's extremely important for aesthetics and atmosphere to take the time to add nice lighting to your buildings and creations, and this is where the narrative can help dictate which lights are the best to use. I have two strategies that I rely on when placing my lights. The first is to place them everywhere and overlight the area. Then I start taking away various lights to see what kind of shadows and effects are created. And the ones I end up liking, I keep, and the ones I don't like, I leave them deleted. Then the other strategy is I like to limit my light choices. I tend to pick one type of light and use it for a specific purpose, and then if I feel I need more variation, I'll pick a second type of light but limit its use to another specific purpose. And I find that that helps to add variation to the lighting but not be so over decorated that it becomes unrealistic. Sometimes I'll use a third light choice, but that's pretty uncommon. As this video reaches its conclusion, you can see now I'm adding some more piratey decorations to the outside of the building. I've also broken up the large wall surfaces with some wood beams and supports, which is something I already touched upon earlier in this video. I'd like to mention that all of this footage is from a larger Let's Play that you can find on my channel if you want to see Whacky World's construction in real time. I always welcome criticism and feedback on my videos, so don't be shy. If there's anything you want to leave a comment about, then I'm eager to hear it or read it. And if you have any strategies or techniques you employ for your creations, I'd love to hear what they are and maybe exchange some ideas. I hope you found this entertaining or helpful, possibly even both, and I thank you for watching, and you have yourself a great afternoon.